Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. My guest today is the chairman of Maruti, India's biggest car manufacturer with a market share of almost 50%. R.C. Bhargav has just written a book, and here it is. It's called Getting Competitive, and it's his answer to the question, how can India boost its manufacturing growth? With me today to discuss his ideas is Mr. Bhargav himself. Mr. Bhargav, would I be right in saying that the starting point of your book is your belief that from Nehru to Modi, India has used the same set of policies to both promote manufacturing and industrialization and also to promote social justice? And as a result, neither of the objectives have been properly achieved.
That is roughly what I've said. Although I have said that Mr. Modi has made a departure to the extent that he has made special policies for making it much easier to do business and therefore reduce cost. And he has introduced a number of separate policies to bring in social justice. He is not now combining those in any new policy. For example, all the policies which has been done for the village, whether it's giving gas to them, giving electricity to them, or providing digitalized payments to new bank accounts, all of those things
I
are
don't
not linked to
I don't
industrial policy.
agree with that. But the focus of your book is primarily on how manufacturing growth and industrialization can be accelerated. And there again, am I right in saying that in a sense, in a single sentence, in fact, this is the secret of what you propose? And I'm quoting you, manufacturing growth can only accelerate if the cost of manufactured goods is kept as low as possible while quality keeps improving. That's the secret, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, that any businessman who is competing today, Karan will tell you that reduce cost, increase quality, and you will succeed. This is what Suzuki has been doing all these years. This is what we've been doing in Maruti. If we have achieved some degree of success in India, it is because we have exactly followed these two things: cost, quality. The problem I see in India is that our policymakers don't think that reducing cost has anything to do with them or their policies. They think that is not relevant. It's only the entrepreneur who should reduce cost. They have no responsibility, which is absolutely incorrect.
And that is a problem that continues under the Modi government as well. It goes all the way back from 47 to 2020. That attitude of government has not altered.
Yeah, I think the bureaucracy has remained the same, whether it was 1950 or whether it's 2020. I don't think there has been any large or significant change in the attitude and thinking of bureaucracy as far as it relates to business matters and
I'll come,
industrial life.
I'll come to bureaucracy in a moment's time. But first, I want to point out something else that I think is the essential core message of your book. You believe that the best way of keeping manufacturing costs as low as possible whilst improving quality is to emulate the Japanese way of working. You write, and I'm quoting you, I have become convinced that the Japanese way of working and living is what would best suit the political, economic, and social environment of our country. So, in a
Sure.
very real sense, what you're recommending is capitalism Japanese style.
Yeah, because I think that our social conditions, our political conditions, do not at all seem consistent with the Western way of managing companies, where there's a huge difference between the top management and the workers. And there's a different lifestyle for those people. And, you have to understand that the voter in India primarily consists of poor people. And these people don't want policies which will make the top management owners of companies become richer and richer. And that's where the problem lies.
You're emphasizing the social aspects of the Japanese way of working, and in particular, the fact that The differences between management and workers are minimal. But there's the other aspect of Japanese working that may be more difficult for India to accept, and it's actually inherent in your title. It's competition, which is why you called your book, and I'm holding it up for the audience, Getting Competitive. You know better than me that the Indian system doesn't give competition free rein. We put curbs on it, we regulate it. As a country, we don't like systems that allow some people to race ahead whilst others get left behind. How do you change that mental attitude, which seems to be averse to competition and some succeeding?
Change started in 1991 when the earlier policy, which actually went the other way of positively preventing competition. That is what happened between 1950 and 1991. Policies were made which made sure that there was no competition. 1991 opened up at least certain sectors to competition, and we have seen that there is actually competition. You take the telecom sector, it's been a competitive sector. You take the hospitality sector, it's become competitive. You take healthcare, it's become competitive. And of course, the automobile sector has become highly competitive. So it's not that in India we don't get competition or that we don't understand competition. We do, and we've seen the benefits of it in many sectors. But despite that, we don't carry it through the logical conclusion of making all aspects of our industry competitive.
And surely the reason and explanation for that is something you were hinting a moment ago, that India remains a poor country. 20% of our population live below the poverty line, and it's a very minimal poverty line. 30% hover just about above it. And together they are the majority of voters in the country. So how do you ensure that the measures that are needed for their social justice, which are essential, don't contradict and do not reduce the competition that is essential for manufacturing growth? Isn't there an inherent contradiction here which our politicians aren't able to sort out?
No, I don't think that allowing competition between private sector industry anyway conflicts with the ability of the political establishment to keep taking measures to create more and more social justice. There is no inherent competition or contradiction in that happening.
So what you're saying is that on the one hand, the government should allow the private sector and presumably also the public sector to compete without rein, without regulation, but obviously fairly and correctly, and separate from that the measures that are necessary to provide social justice to those who are poor. The two must be tackled by different policies, not by attempting to do it the same way.
That's right. There must be separate policies. It's beginning to happen. The new policies on public sector, where they have limited the number of public sector units in a sector. They have allowed private sector to come into that. I think that's a step towards what I'm saying, open up public sector to competition. Actually, of course, I think public sector will never be able to compete. The way the structuring of the public sector is in India, the way the laws are, the way the parliamentary control is, the way the constitution defines what is an instrument of state, all of that, I think, will inherently prevent public sector becoming competitive. And we have seen that wherever there is private sector competing with the public sector, telecom is one area, aviation is another area. You see what happens to the public sector companies. And then the taxpayer is used to support those companies. That is where I think the policy needs to change. The taxpayer should not support such companies.
Let's come back to that key thought which you have, which I think is the kernel of your book, that the secret to success is promoting manufacturing growth. And you write in your book, to achieve manufacturing competitiveness, the most valuable asset is the people. And you make some very interesting comments about two different sets of people, and I want to discuss both with you. First, you talk about civil servants or bureaucrats, as you call them, who not only advise in making manufacturing policy but also implement it. You say that by training, they are essentially administrators who know how to maintain law and order. That makes them risk averse. They follow precedents, and so they often become inflexible in your thinking. And I should point out, you probably know this better than anyone because you began life in the civil service as a bureaucrat yourself. In
Yeah.
contrast, you write that businessmen are risk takers. They look at all options before they decide, and what they choose to do is determined by the fact that it can provide the greatest profit and the largest productivity. And therefore, there's an inherent contradiction, if not opposition, in the approach of bureaucrats and that of businessmen. And you suggest in your book, so I'm asking you to correct me, that bureaucrats are not the right people to either advise on manufacturing policy or implement it.
No, what I have tried to say in that, Karan, is that the existing structure of the bureaucracy, the way it is managed, the way it is trained, is not appropriate for economic development or industrial development primarily. And I'm suggesting that you need a special cadre of people who will deal with industrial policy, who should be exposed to industrial working, who should understand what industry is all about, what competition is all about. And it cannot be that today you're in the home ministry and tomorrow you're making industrial policy, because the whole approach is different. In administrative decisions are basically control decisions, how to control situations. Business decisions have to be far more flexible. They have to be uh, somewhat long term. They have to take into account options, and they have to take some risk, all of which does not happen in normal administrative work. So the combination of people who are essentially administrators doing such work as industrial policy and administering such policy is something which is doomed to failure. It cannot work.
Which is why you suggest that we need a special cadre of officers to man the economic ministries. But I presume you would go one step further as well. You would say that our administrators need to be taught and trained to understand the needs and requirements of industry and manufacturing. I don't believe that is part of the course at the academy in Missouri. It needs to be included, and then they need to become special cadre officers restricted to the economic ministry.
Maybe don't have to start that early, but maybe after a person has done 6, 7, 8 years in the service, you can pick out people who show a little bit more, what shall I say, flexibility, who are willing to learn new things, who are not set in their ways. Pick those people up and train them, expose them to industrial working, give them special training, and then keep them only in areas where they deal with industrial policies. Don't again transfer them that, oh, let's see, do a stint in the health ministry or the education ministry. That should not happen.
That's very clear. Now, there's a second set of people you talk about, and in some senses, it's a particularly fascinating chapter, and that is workers. You point out, first of all, that most workers come from rural backgrounds, and there's a need to change their rural village mindset to that of urban workers. As you put it, and I'm quoting you, they do not have any idea of what competitiveness means, how it can be achieved, and its impact on their careers and their quality of life. From your personal experience, how easy or how difficult is it to change that rural village mindset to that of an urban factory worker?
It takes a little time, it takes an effort, because this is exactly what we had to do when we started Maruti in 1983. Because it was clear to us that if we were going to follow what Suzuki said should be the way a factory should be managed, then the workers had to be trained and motivated to understand what was actually in their long-term interest. And I made a special effort in this area. Karan, as I've said in my other book, the Maruti story, I spent a lot of time with the workers, the unions, in trying to tell them how the growth and prosperity of the industry was the only way in which the workers would get a better life in the future. If the company didn't do well, there was no way in which the worker can do well. And I must tell you, the workers understood this very quickly.
But
It is
I
a
think
different,
it's a
it is a
process.
different matter bringing them up to the standard that you must attendance must be over 95% and you must come 15 minutes before time. You shouldn't take leave and all that kind of. That took a little longer to do, but the worker is very quick to understand what is in his interest.
But I take it that this is a process that takes working at. You have to be dedicated and persistent, and you have to be prepared to do it over a couple of years or maybe more. It's not like instant coffee.
Yeah. But it is in the interest of the entrepreneur that this happens because the rewards you get out of this are ultimately when the worker understands this and starts working actually to make the company a better company. Those rewards are enormous. I mean, there's no way you can get those rewards in any other form of manufacturing.
Absolutely. Now, there's a second element in your book about the treatment of workers by management that is equally important. You point out that the Japanese attitude is to create a single team, to remove the differences that otherwise divide management from workers, and to create one attitude, one team dedicated to wanting the best for the company. Now, that's again an attitude that was new to India when you brought it in. How difficult was it to achieve? Because I imagine a lot of the management working with you were of the old school.
Actually, everybody understood, the workers particularly. First, we had a union which was affiliated to INTA. When Maruti started, Mr. Krishnamurthy brought a union leader from BHEL to start a union in Maruti. And he started a union, it was INTAC affiliated union. But when the workers understood more of what we were talking about, they understood that having a politically affiliated union would make it very difficult to continue with a single union. And right at the time when Mr. Rajiv Gandhi was the Prime Minister, the union decided to disaffiliate from the INTA. I was called by the then minister and others to explain how it's possible that in a Congress regime, I should have a union which is disaffiliating from INTA. And so I had to explain to all of them why this was necessary. And it paid off. When Mr. Chautala became the Chief Minister of Haryana, he was very keen to get his own union established in Maruti. And he used all his means of doing this, including having people with Sten guns sitting outside the gate in jeeps in the evening when the shift ended. He couldn't get the workers to form a viable second union.
So, with effort and with time, you won over the loyalty of workers and you convinced them that it was in their interest that the differences between management and workers be diminished. But there's another aspect to this. For instance, at Maruti, from the managing director to the lowest worker, you wear the same uniform. You eat the same food in the same dining room. You have the same personnel policies. You even sit in open plan offices. Was
Yeah.
that difficult for your management to accept? Workers obviously would have loved it, but what about management? Did this stick in the gullet of management?
You know, one of our advantages was that we had a large preponderance of young people in the company. We didn't recruit too many people with experience from other companies. We recruited young engineers and said we'll train them on how to work. We did have a problem with some of our senior people who came from government organizations and government companies. And actually, I think I mentioned it either here or the other book, that at one stage we had to close and lock up a private dining room which these people had formed for themselves so that they could eat their lunch separately from others. Mr. Krishnamurthy was still there at that time in the company. And he totally agreed and he put a lock on that dining room.
You mention it in this book, but the truth of the matter is that Maruti has had union troubles. You've had some pretty bad strikes in your Manesar plant. So even though you operate as a team, you had your friction and you've had your tension. In fact, you've even had violence.
Because the same effort in educating the workers was not put in Manesar as was put in Gurgaon. Secondly, in Manesar, in the recruitment of people, there was not enough care taken to see that the workforce was a fairly diverse workforce. In Gurgaon, we have a very diverse workforce because when we making recruitment, we decided that since it is a national project, we should have people from all over the country. And that is what led to a situation where there was no concentration of people from any one area. Manesar didn't do that.
Okay, I understand that. Tell me then, where do you stand on the issue of hire and fire? There are many industrialists who believe that that is a bullet the government must fight. They're very keen it should happen. I take it as far as Maruti is concerned, and your concept of a single family and this concept of unity between workers and management, that hire and fire is not something you're keen on at all.
It's not compatible at all with what I'm saying. I don't see the sense of hire and fire. If you say hire and fire, you're saying that the worker has no contribution to make to the productivity and quality of what is being done in the factory. He has no commitment to what he is doing. He is not going to be somebody who feels that the company is his company. Can't have a hire and fire policy.
That's very clear. Let me end this part by putting this to you. Your company has been one of the most successful companies in India. Though, as I pointed out in the introduction, not just the market leader, but virtually 50% of the market share is yours. Do you believe this will encourage other industrialists to follow your working practice to emulate the Japanese style? Because so far, I'll be honest, you aren't inspiring others to follow you.
You're right, Karan. It's very hard to explain why such a success story should not lead to many others following what we were doing. It's not happened. And my assessment is that generally it has not happened because one of the requirements of this is that the top management cannot live a life of luxury and opulence. You have to treat the company as an asset belonging to all the stakeholders. It's not your personal asset. Most Indian companies are owned by people who have promoted them. They treat them as their personal assets. And if you treat a company as your personal asset, you're very unlikely to then try and form a partnership with your employees, including workers.
But the real problem, although you haven't quite put it as bluntly as I'm about to put it, is the mental attitude of Indian industrialists who see their companies as personal assets, who have been spoilt by the extravagance of Western style consumerism which they've got used to. You point out in your book, the Japanese managers live simply, they don't have personal aircrafts and yachts. Indian industrialists inspire to grand houses, rich living, and a very different lifestyle.
Correct? That's the Western style. The Americans do the same.
And so this imitation of Western extravagance is another factor that's holding us back. It's not just the absence of competition in our system. It's not just the fact that bureaucrats devise and advise policies that don't necessarily make sense, but it's also the attitude of industrialists themselves. All three combined to retard Indian competitiveness.
Yeah, I agree totally with you.
Which case, let's take a break at that point, Mr. Bhargav. When I come back, I want to speak to you as chairman of Maruti, India's biggest car manufacturer by far, on the state of the economy, how Maruti itself is faring, and what more you think the government must do. But first, a little break. back to a special interview for The Wire. My guest is the chairman of Maruti, India's biggest car manufacturer by far, with almost a 50% share of the market, R.C. Bhargav. Mr. Bhargav, let's talk about the state of the economy. First, do you accept the view that in June we saw green shoots emerging largely because of such things as improvements in electricity generation, consumption of petroleum products, increases in revenue earning freight traffic on the railways, but also a certain measure of rebound in FMCG sales, tractors and two-wheelers? Do you accept that this constitutes green shoots, or do you think that's a bit of an exaggerated interpretation?
Karan, I'm not sure what different people mean by green shoots. But what is evident is that the moment the economy is opened up, a lot of people are going to and have been going to fulfill their pent up demand from the past. I've seen this happening in our sector. Today, in the automobile sector, the demand for cars at the moment is actually higher than what it was at the same time last year. Now, whether this is a green shoot or a brown shoot, I don't know. I don't want to get into that debate. But certainly, demand is picking up in a number of areas. How to sustain this demand, how to make it accelerate, how to make it a permanent kind of situation is the real challenge.
I'll come to that in a moment's time, but after the June green shoots, there were reports in the Economic Times that the first 3 weeks of July have actually seen some of the momentum diminish because of the series of lockdowns that we've seen in states like Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Bangalore, Patna, Pune. In fact, Mahesh Vyas, the CEO of the Center for Monitoring the Indian Economy, said so specifically. He said data for the first 2 weeks of July suggests that the recovery has stopped progressing beyond the level it reached in the last 2 weeks of June. So if there were green shoots in June, are they beginning to wither in July because of these localized but proliferating lockdowns?
These localized shutdowns have certainly had an impact in some areas. Some of our dealerships have been shut down as a result of this, and therefore sales in those areas got impacted. But I still think that these are all temporary issues. We should look a few months down the road when hopefully there'll be some further improvement in this COVID situation, when maybe a vaccine is becoming more of a reality. We have to say, how do we tackle the economy when that happens?
I'll come to that again because I think that's a very important point to raise. But let me also ask you, what is the situation facing your company, Maruti, today? I'll ask you two questions there. Has production in July improved significantly compared to May? And secondly, how does production in July this year compare to July last year?
Production in July, from May to June, production improved, I don't know how many fold, because May was very little. June, I think we went up to some 50,000 or so. July, I think we will get to a much higher number. Production is going up. Despite these local shutdowns, we do not have a problem in getting components for manufacturing. In most states, the manufacturing vendors have been able to get permission to work even during shutdown periods. So it's not that the states have completely shut down all activities. They have allowed component manufacturing to continue, for example. And I think sales have stopped, but not manufacturing. And because of that, our production this month, even compared to June, will be substantially higher in July.
And how does July 2020 compare to July 2019?
I think we'll be lower than July 19, but not by too much. And that's not because we didn't have demand for it. I think the production will be lower because the way production is carried out today, where you have to make sure that worker safety is given priority number one. We cannot follow a system where to maximize production, we do away with the safety requirements. At least in
Absolutely.
Maruti, we are not doing that.
But you
And
said,
because of which, sorry?
carry on.
So because of those safety precautions and the way production is carried out, the actual productivity in the factories is lower. Second shifts have opened in the plant only a day or two ago. Gujarat hasn't been able to get into a second shift yet. There's a manpower issue there. So there are issues in production, but it's not because of lack of demand.
In fact, you said a very interesting thing about demand a moment ago. You said demand is higher than this time last year. I take it that is because it's pent up demand from April and May, or do you
Possible.
believe that it's in fact a new reflection of purchasing power, which would be very surprising?
No, I would be surprised if it is purchasing power. I think to an extent it is pent up demand from actually the whole of last year because 1920, was a bad year for the auto industry also. The total sales in 1920 declined by 18%.
You mean 2019?
1920
Ah, I see.
compared to 1819, we went down by 20% last year. So there was a pent up demand, but also there is today a feeling amongst a lot of people that they need to get personal transport because they do not want to use shared transport anymore. That could also be adding to demand. And this increases demand to a large extent is for the smaller cars.
Now, let me put this to you. Given the situation your company faces, but also, very importantly, given your view of the economy, do we need a further fiscal stimulus? And if so, how soon and how much?
I think that this country needs to seriously look at improving the rate of growth of manufacturing so that the economic growth and employment goes up. Because this problem of poverty and unemployment cannot be dealt with anymore in the same manner as we've been doing it over the years in the past. We need to understand that without manufacturing growth, the employment problem is not going to be sorted out. And therefore, all the measures which are required to make manufacturing competitive, which may include a whole lot of restructuring of various economic policies and institutions. I think this is the time to do it because the COVID has thrown up a lot of issues, especially dealing with poor people.
But tell me this, do we need a fiscal stimulus?
Do we need a
Fiscal stimulus, a greater fiscal
oh,
stimulus to revive demand, to help those
you know,
industries like
I'm
hotel.
not an expert. I'm not an expert in what fiscal stimuluses do or don't do. I still believe in the old-fashioned system. Make manufacturing as low cost as possible. Improve your distribution system. Let the customer buy products which give him greater and greater value. And if beyond that, don't depress demand. Demand is depressed today, like in the automobile sector, in my sector, for example, by exceedingly high rates of taxation, both GST and state levies. Now that depresses demand. I think that is wrong. You have to let the taxation on products and manufactured products be
Okay,
similar to what other parts of the world have.
let's then leave the question of whether we need another fiscal stimulus, how much and how soon, to economists. As you say, you're an old-fashioned person who believes that manufacturing grows when costs come down whilst quality is being maintained. And that, in a sense, is the kernel of your book. Let me ask you about something else. You hinted at it a moment ago. Is this a crisis that gives us an opportunity to thoroughly restructure the economy?
I think so. I think this is an excellent opportunity because there have been many issues, including the fall in the purchasing power of people generally. the GDP, everybody agrees GDP this year will decline. How much? Different people have different estimates. Again, as I said, that's for economists to worry about. But there is a decline in income levels, there's a decline in the GDP. Purchasing power has to go down. Now, in this situation, unemployment will increase. And this is the time where I think people everywhere, the voter particularly, will be happy to accept changes which are designed to create more opportunities for him in terms of better manufacturing growth, better
Can
economy.
I, can I interrupt? Do you have in your mind the sort of restructuring changes that this is an opportunity to implement? Do you have two, three such ideas in your mind?
I would start by saying government should look at a lot of their policies which impact industry and see if these policies actually affect cost of manufacturing. Government should issue clear instructions to their officers and in writing that it's the job of the government officers to facilitate private industry competitiveness, not to fear that by doing so they will come under the scrutiny of the vigilance agencies. This is required in writing. I don't think oral assurances are actually convincing the bureaucracy because they look long term and they're not sure when the oral assurances will be forgotten by whom. So I think the written directions are required so that the bureaucracy actually acts as a facilitator. I think more education is required, and these institutions like the CII and FICCI and ASSOCHAM, they should all get involved in this whole question of looking at how industry can lower costs of production, how manufacturing can become more competitive. I think this again is something which government should concentrate on. I don't think, today in India we look at I don't know how many different kinds of things which different people pursue and different people want. Our main priority has to be manufacturing.
You know, as I listen to you, Mr. Bhargav, you're not just talking about a change of attitude and approach by politicians, you're probably talking about a change of politician as well. So far, India has produced very successful politicians who manage contradictions. And they do it extremely well because ours is a country of many contradictions. But you're talking of a politician with conviction and courage, what the British call a conviction politician, and they usually say this with Mrs. Thatcher in mind. Someone who knows what to do, has the determination to do it, and is prepared to bear the consequences of the criticism he or she may face in the process. Many people thought in 2014 that Mr. Modi might be India's first conviction politician. It turns out he's not. He's a very good manager of the situation. But you're talking of someone with that conviction in his heart to determinedly go ahead and change things. Restructuring the economy means doing away with a lot, building again, and diminishing and demolishing what isn't necessary. Do you see such a politician anywhere on the horizon?
I still think that Mr. Modi has the capability of doing this. I think he believes in a lot of things which you're talking about, but the political environment, the circumstances, whether it's the parliament, whether it's the ability to get laws through, whether it's the ability to carry the rest of the people within the party as such, that is more questionable. But I still think, because I've known him now for about how many, 9, 10 years, I believe he is a person who actually believes that manufacturing has to grow, and I believe he is capable of getting it done. The bureaucracy is holding him back.
You may be right that he's got the conviction, but bureaucracy or the system is holding him back. But I'll just point out two things. Number one, he's been in power for 6 years and he's done very little to show that conviction. Instead, there were things like demonetization that were a bit of a disaster, but leave that aside. And the second thing is, Mrs. Thatcher, when she changed Britain, did it despite the fact it wasn't popular. Her own party didn't agree with her all the time. Certainly the opposition did it. But carried on. Here, Mr. Modi is allowing the bureaucracy or the system to stop him. Mrs. Thatcher did away with them entirely.
Yeah, Karan. But understand that in India today, none of the economists, none of the bureaucrats are advocating anything like what we are discussing. Why is that? Why don't our economists recommend some of these things on competitiveness? One reads lots of articles, lots of speeches, which are economists and very eminent economists who held very eminent positions in the government give. I
You
haven't
know,
heard.
Bhargav, what you're saying is fascinating. It's a sort of subtle twist on what Keynes said as a joke. Keynes said behind every politician is the defunct economist. What you're saying is behind Mr. Modi, there is no economist who agrees with his convictions to give him the courage to fulfill those convictions. I mean, you may be right, but all I'll point out is that if he genuinely has those convictions, absence of economic advice or the pressure of his party or the system should not deter him to the extent that it
Yes,
has
but
done
he
nothing.
needs he needs
Wrong.
he needs some people in important positions in government to support him and say that these are the things which the economy needs to do.
But
There's nobody I find who's saying it.
but
Nobody.
it's his government. He chooses the minister. Surely he can find like-minded people to give him support.
I wish, where are they?
Well, yes, so too.
I
But
mean, where
anyway,
are these? What are our economists doing in this area? Why haven't economists for 70 years talked of competitiveness?
all right. You're laying the blame on the system. You're laying the blame on economists who don't want to change their attitudes. You cling to the thought, and you may well be right, that Mr. Modi has the conviction, it's just the system is holding him back. Let's leave this to the audience to decide. I'm deeply grateful for this interview, and I hope that many people will sit up and listen, in particular to what you said in part one about how Japanese style way of working not only makes for a better, happier, and more productive company, but for a country like India, it also makes for a more moral outcome where you don't have a few who are outrageously rich, whilst the vast majority remain poor. Thank you very much for this interview.
Thank
Mr.
you,
Bharat.
Karan.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
take care, and stay safe.
Thank you very much.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.